Hidden Figures. Now, of course, this is going to be my spoiler-free review of the film. I'm not going to do a spoiler discussion like I normally do in most of my movies because I feel like it's actually moot for this type of film because you kind of know what type of movie it is going in, and it's based off of true stories, and it's also a big chunk of the movie is about the space race, and it's, you know, the U.S. versus the USSR, and who gets to go to space first, and how all that plays out. And it's like, you know, if you know history, you know how that plays out. And you know that the story is about women that helped NASA with the space program solely based off the trailer, so you kind of already know everything about it going in. I feel like all I could spoil is like the dialogue pretty much, like, you know, the individual ladies' lives, but I feel like there's not enough to really spoil for this film, so I'm not going to do a discussion for that. But I'm going to keep this one vague even if I'm not doing a spoiler discussion. I'm going to keep this one vague, of course, as a spoiler-free review. And simply put, I like this movie. I thought it was a nice film, and it's a good story. It was definitely a good story. It's a nicer version of what you would typically get with you know, a 1960s film where it's about, you know, black people dealing with segregation and things like that, because it focuses more on these women and the specific parts that they have to deal with. It doesn't focus so much on the overall, like, civil rights movements. There's some stuff in there because it does, with it being a true story, it actually does reference some big moments within the actual time period. But it's kind of like, yeah, we referenced it, and now let's go back to the three ladies and talk about their points, which was them dealing with segregation and stuff within the workplace. So it still had, you know, focus on racism and stuff, but it was much more died down compared to many other films where you'd see it where it's a much bigger issue. So it's kind of one of those things where it's still there, but it's kind of like that sort of, that pseudo safe zone where it's like, okay, yeah, it's racism and stuff, but it's done as like kind of a feel-good, it's a feel-good movie, admittedly. So it's still in there, but it's done in a much lighter way than you'd see in pretty much anything else. It doesn't focus on the harshest stuff. They like just barely get to like the darkest stuff, and then it's like, okay, we're gonna kind of, you know, go back to the actual characters. So in that regard, it's kind of like everyone can watch this, you know, it's like you can go see it and you won't be like super upset except for like some very certain portions. Specifically if you're black, because it's just the thing is like, you know, segregation, obviously racism and stuff like that's a big part of the country. And for anyone who may not be like, this is like a little, tiny little look into black culture. So me personally, I don't like to watch a lot of history stuff about that because it makes me upset. Like, it just makes me mad and it makes me sad at the same time. That's a terrible combination of emotions. So I tend to like stay away from all that stuff, and that's kind of what made me want to see this film, because I could tell from the trailer that it wasn't going to be like, I'm going to be mad and upset through like this whole film. And so I was like, I can handle seeing this movie. And that's a big thing. That actually does happen a lot for people because history kind of sucks in this country. And this was definitely a film where you could go see it and it's like, okay, it's definitely there, but it's done in a much, like I said, kind of a safer way, where it's like, yeah, it's there, but it's not like thrown in your face to either make you feel uncomfortable, you know, like you happen to have ancestors who may have been that way or still have family members that are that way, or, you know, if you are black, then it won't make you super duper upset. There are a couple of scenes in there where it's like, you know, you really do see the struggle that these women had to go through. Specifically, there's one portion that I really loved, and of course I can't spoil it, but this is kind of a back and forth sort of thing for one character, and I knew that it would have to come up at some point, and when they do it, I thought it was really done well, and I was like, I really love that scene. But ultimately, I thought it was a really good movie. I really enjoyed all the actors in this. I thought did a good job. Oddly enough, I typically don't focus on this, but the music was actually really good, because the music, I heard it was done by Pharrell, and I wish I could remember the other person. I want to say Hans Zimmer and Pharrell did the music for this, and that was crazy because I think they may have used like one song from the actual era, and everything else was made for the movie just to sound like it was made in the 1960s. And it was actually really good music. I was like, man, this is actually some pretty good music. And typically I don't focus on that, but I think it was because I could tell them, like, I know that this is modern music. Like, I could tell that this wasn't some classic song I've heard a million times from every other movie that's set in like the 1960s and stuff. And I was like, that's actually really good. I was like, this is clearly a modern song, but it's done with the style of a 1960 song, and it was really well done. Like that, they have, of course, have multiple songs. It's not just one song over and over. But I really enjoyed that, so I was very surprised that I noticed how much I like the music, because they have it, and it's done very well. It's like, there are just certain scenes where things are happening, of course, with it being about, space travel and stuff like that. There are quite a few sort of montage scenes where it's like, all right, these people, there are a ton of people doing a ton of work all at once. It's not always going to be like, all right, let's talk about the numbers in this. Sometimes they have montage scenes, so you get music in there. It's not too much. It's not like overdone or anything. But I really enjoyed it. I thought it had some good music. Like I said, I thought all the acting was very well done, and I actually liked the part of the story of the three women when they go to NASA and just what they have to deal with, because it's kind of like three little stories, like they're friends, and that's one of the things with true stories and stuff like that. You never know what's actually fact and what they kind of just sort of built up for the film to make it seem like fact, because I don't really know if these three women were truly friends or not. Maybe they just worked in the same area, so they kind of just did that for the movie, that they happen to be friends. Because Taraji P. Henson's character, she's like the main character, and it's kind of a clear focus on that from the beginning of the film, that she's like the main character. And then of course we have our other two ladies, and they get focus, of course, as well. It's just not as balanced, and you can tell that where certain things happen, and then there's a huge chunk of time where it's like, all right, let's focus on this character, or let's focus on the overall story, which was, let's try to get a man into space and try to beat the Russians to the moon, that sort of thing. So it would be like, all right, this kind of big moment happened, and then it would kind of go back to the space stuff for a really long time, and then it would be like, all right, yeah, this other person who's not Taraji P. Henson's character, now we get to focus on her again, and it would be like kind of a big chunk, and it's like, yeah, you could tell that it was clearly focused on this certain character compared to the other two characters, where they do something really big, and it's like, that's a really huge moment for them, and then it's like, almost, it feels like, like 20 minutes later, it's like, okay, here they are doing something else important. Like, they show up and they have like their friends moments, but as far as like individual character moments, it was a lot of Taraji P. Henson's character. And of course I suck at names, so I can't remember like any of the characters' actual names, which is really crappy because they're actual people now. But I still thought it was really well done. Like I said, it's a feel-good movie, so it's kind of, you kind of know what to expect going into it. Like I said, it's not only based off of history with the space race, which, if most of the people seeing this movie, of course, probably won't have been born during that time. I wasn't, so pretty much like 99% of the people seeing this film will not have been alive when people were going to the moon. Like, that's just true. So it's interesting in that fact of its history, but it's history that a lot of people might not know. And I'm out of college, so I don't know what the heck they're teaching as far as history. And I certainly don't remember learning about like the space race when I was learning history. It was more like the first president's sort of history. So it's very interesting thinking about that and going into it. Like, some people might actually be surprised by this, where it's like, oh, I don't know if we did this or not as far as space travel and stuff. And it's like, that's funny that it could be tension about, actual history. So I thought that was interesting when I was watching the film. Like, this could actually be tense for some people who are too young to know what actually happened, as far as or the space race. So I thought that was actually kind of cool. That's just an overall thing for like younger viewers and stuff. But for someone like me, it's like, well, like, I know what's going to happen here, but they still, do the movie thing where it's like, what's going to happen here and what's going to happen there, and it's like, well, I actually know what's going to happen because this is a true story. At least, the space stuff, hard to fictionalize that, what we ended up actually doing. So I like that part of it, and that's just sort of, like I said, that's just kind of an individual viewer sort of thing as to whether or not it's kind of tense in certain moments if you know your history or not. But ultimately, I think this was a good movie. It's oddly a feel-good film. They do focus on the racism and stuff, and they have those moments, but it's not like hit you over the head type stuff. It's not, so focused on the civil rights movement. And they have that stuff in there, too. They have it where you have people who try to take the lighter route of getting what they want, and then you have characters who do take a more aggressive approach, stuff like that. Or it's at least mentioned if we don't actually get to see it from certain characters. So I do like the fact that they at least mention every portion of it, where it's like, yeah, this happened and that happens, and this really sucks and this happened, but nobody gives a crap that it happened, even though it should be a huge deal. And I like that in some of the dialogue where they talk about historical moments that should have made a difference across the entire country. And it's like, yeah, that was amazing there, but people here still don't really give a crap about race and, you know, not having things segregated. And I was like, I actually like that. And like I said, it doesn't, for the most part, it doesn't get to the point where it makes you just really upset. Like, man, it just beats you over the head with, like, this is how crappy racism is. Because, you know, when you grow up, especially with this movie being about black characters, when you grow up black, you know how crappy racism was. So you watch certain things and it's like, yeah, I've been there. I've had those emotions already. Kind of don't mind having a film that's set during that era that touches on it, but doesn't beat you over the head with it. And it allows for this story to be told about these three women. And I think that's kind of the point, because the story isn't about, like, oh, it's about America in the 1960s with racism. It's about these three women specifically dealing with racism in their, you know, within their job. So that's, of course, what it truly focuses on. And you do see a lot of different types of racism just because it's three different women doing things, not only in the workplace, but in NASA, of all places, where it's not only, you know, no black people, it's basically no women. All the women are, you know, 1960s, so it's basically secretary, and that's it. That's pretty much what you are, secretary, or janitor, or as they are known in the film, they call them computers. It was before they actually had computers. So it was just very interesting going through that. They do have something that was really funny in there that I won't spoil, but I thought that was actually very interesting that ended up being an actual part of the story, because it seemed like it was just a jokey thing at first, and it was like, oh, this is actually, oddly enough, it's not just a little joke about, you know, the time and the technology. This actually happened, and this was what was happening when things were advancing, and it wasn't just like a little joke moment, like, what are these things called and stuff like that. So I thought that was actually kind of cool. I was like, I thought it was just a little joke scene, and then it was like, no, this is actually an important, you know, part of the story. So I personally enjoyed the film. Of course, I would love to know what you guys thought about it. If you want to mention spoilers or anything like that, just put spoiler before you know, have your comments. But I would love to know what you guys thought about it. So please comment below. Let me know your favorite parts about it, your least favorite parts about it. And like I said, with this film being about these three women and it not focusing as much on, you know, kind of the broader scale of racism, like, you know, civil rights and stuff like that, I would love to know what you guys thought about that. Because for me, like I said, not enjoying having that kind of thrown in my face so much. That is why I avoid a lot of movies, because I really do try not to get that upset, because I don't, that's all that happens when I watch movies about, like, racism and stuff. It just makes me, like, super mad. That's why I don't like to watch them. Like, it's not that I don't want to see the movies. Typically I don't like drama movies, but I really don't like racism drama movies, because it just makes me mad and sad at the same time. It's like, you can't time travel and change stuff. And so that's why I typically avoid stuff like that. And that's, like I said early on, why I did want to see this film. It was, not only did I think it was an interesting story, I thought it was definitely a good story just from the trailer, but it was like, I could tell that this isn't going to be the worst of the worst, because I already know what the worst is. Like, I know that history already, and I'm fine not seeing that in this film. And some people might not like it as much because of that, because it doesn't focus so much on it. But at the same time, every movie that does have black characters in the 60s pretty much does focus on that. The only other movie, honestly, if I'm being completely honest, that I can think of that doesn't focus on racism in the past, that focuses on black main characters, is the comedy film Life with Martin Lawrence and Eddie Murphy. That's the only other film I can honestly think of that takes place, and I think that was like the 1940s or something like that, that takes place in that time frame and doesn't focus all on racism. Like, that's a straight up comedy movie. But this was, you know, an actual drama film. It has funny moments too, of course. That's the jokes in there. But I like it for that. I like the fact that it can focus on it and not, like, just beat you over the head with it and just make it, like, super upsetting. So I can actually appreciate it for that. I know, like I said, some people might not like that. It doesn't focus as much on the civil rights movement, but then we have, like, a million other movies for that. And I think, like I said, the point of this movie was really to talk about these women, but they don't just say, like, yeah, this totally doesn't happen. Some things are definitely, it's easily, you know, easy to see that could be dramatized, where it probably wasn't as nice as it was in real life. But even with them, I'm like, you know what? I'm fine with that being dramatized. At least this one time, I'm fine with it, because we have a million other movies to show you what it was truly like. And even then, they don't show you what it was truly like, because they can't, you know, be dropping the N-bomb like 1,500 times in the film. So, you know, there's stuff like that. Just like with this movie, there's stuff like that where it's like, you know, they aren't going to put certain words in as often as they definitely would be in there in real life. But I'm fine with it, like I said. But I would love to know what you guys thought about that balance where it was more focused on these women and just the story of them getting somewhere else. And, of course, that deals with racism, but it didn't deal with, like, the harshest stuff. It just dealt with kind of like, it dealt with like the very surface racism, and it's not like the super crazy stuff that, you know, you can look up and find when people getting attacked and things like that. It was, you know, kind of slightly eased over, and it's like, all right, there's sprinkles of this, and then, you know, let's head back. But I'd love to know what you guys thought about that and the entire film in general, so please comment below, let me know, and thanks for watching.